Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries, and in this video I'm going to be reviewing the Machine Chronicle by Onyx Path Publishing and White Wolf. Now, this is a modern horror book for the New World of Darkness setting. It's approximately 250 pages long, hardback, with some very evocative front cover art by Sam Araya showing a strange biomechanical geometric structure staring down at a ruined cityscape from a floating assemblage of gears. As a long-time fan of the New World of Darkness, who had become a little jaded with it, I was pleased to hear that White Wolf and Onyx Path were releasing Chronicle books that updated the rules and provided you with additional tools for your GMing arsenal to run a specific type of game. In this case, horror stories where a huge force or mechanism lurks behind the skin of the world that we know, and in some cases drives it forward. I actually purchased this book and ran it some time ago, albeit not using the New World of Darkness rules, but adapting the Fate Accelerated system to use the excellent background material in this book, before I published the second Chronicle book, Blood and Smoke, which I've already reviewed, and I'll put a link to down below. But reviewing it seemed to have slipped my mind, or perhaps the gears of the Machine Chronicle simply turned, and with the smell of grease and forgotten dreams, the idea was plucked from my mind. Who knows? But nevertheless, I completely forgot about it until I watched the excellent review put out by the gentleman gamer Matthew Dawkins. Again, I'll put a link to his video down below. The Machine Chronicle uses the standard D10 dice pool mechanic common throughout both iterations of the World of Darkness. Although there are rules that can influence this one way or the other, the basic idea is that you add up your attribute and your skill dots, then you roll that number of D10s as a dice pool, and each dice that comes up with a certain number or above, in the New World of Darkness case 8+, that counts as a success. You generally require a number of successes to complete a task, as determined by the GM or the storyteller, as they are referred to in the White Wolf Onyx Path games. This book is almost two books under one cover. The first deals with the eponymous God Machine of the title, and how to run a chronicle featuring it as a main element, whilst the second book updates and provides some clarification to the New World of Darkness rules, and I'll be discussing the update later on in this video. The book opens with an atmospheric and very creepy story told in the form of numerous emails and correspondences, where the pervasive influence of the God Machine spreads like a chain letter, seeming at first to provide a benefit whilst actually guiding the force of human destiny. And this is just one of the themes present in the book. The opening fiction does a very good job of portraying that, surrounded by artwork in the muted blue-grey colour scheme that is constant throughout the book. The first part of the book is the introduction, where it clearly lays out the genesis of the God Machine, and that's in terms of where the book came from, the fiction that mentions it strewn throughout other World of Darkness products, since no mortal mind can conceive the beginnings of the actual machine. The mood of the book is one of gradual revelation and discovery of a huge automated but arguably intelligent system working behind the everyday normality of our world, or cogs in the machine being the label that the book applies to it. Occasionally, people become aware of this machine and its workings, and this book focuses on telling their stories. The book very early on states that there will be no definitive answer to the nature of the God Machine inside. It wears its heart on its sleeve and adopts the toolbox approach that I so love about the New World of Darkness, basically saying to the ST, here is a bunch of tools and ideas, take them, put your own ideas in, run with them, and build the God Machine Chronicle that is right for you and is right for your group. The introduction then goes on to give a slightly more detailed look at how people might come into contact and go about investigating the God machine. Those people who react to the knowledge by attempting to worship or placate this giant mechanism. Those who attempt Faustian bargains with it to somehow advance their own agendas. Those who fight it and those who study it. Many examples are provided within the book to spark ideas, and each subsection provides some very evocative suggestions. The introduction then gives us the lowdown on the God machine, and it might seem odd that the introduction is laying bare the secrets of the Chronicle's main antagonist, but that's not really what's happening here. As the chapter goes on to explain, the vastness, the sheer scale of the God machine is too massive and huge to be comprehended as a whole, but it is nevertheless, for all its grand scale and its majesty, its terrible majesty, a mechanism that tends to follow certain patterns and modes of operation when it makes plans. And it's these aspects that the introduction covers, giving you a framework that you can use to build God Machine Chronicle stories. Now, not to go into too much detail, since I don't want to ruin the book for anyone who's planning to buy it, but this part of the introduction covers the various ways in which the God Machine interacts with humanity and certain common themes that run through these operations, whether it's adapting existing human infrastructure to its own purposes, or whether it's building something far more alien, camouflaging it beneath the veil of the commonplace. The introduction gives, in my opinion, some very sensible advice when it comes to featuring a chronicle with an almost omnipotent entity lurking in the background, and that is to never take away your player's sense of free will, or to have them think that the God machine is entirely unbeatable. Whilst it's unlikely that they will ever completely stop the God machine or defeat it, smaller victories, which are victories nonetheless, are very possible against the forces of the God machine. We then move on to chapter 1, called Building the God Machine Chronicle. And chapter 1 discusses creating a framework for a successful chronicle featuring the titular God Machine as the antagonist or a main plot element. And it begins by describing the different tiers of play that can be used, from local, where the games are particularly focused, they sort of zoom in on one area, and characters are normally confined to a couple of key locations. And this is the approach I took with my own game, confining the players to a large tower block during a lurking horror-esque snowstorm, all the way up to a cosmic level of play where the players interact with the workings of the God machine directly, affecting change on a huge scale. Each of these sections provides very sensible advice for running games of the appropriate tier and gives you a sample organisation connected with the God machine that is suitable for use in that tier of play. I must say I found the advice in this section excellent when I ran my local tier game, The Secret of Specto Vale. I'll put a link to some of the write-ups for that down below. And although I didn't actually use the sample organisations, these are also very well written and contain lots of potential plot ideas that any creative ST could use. The chapter then goes on to provide a list of questions and elements to consider when running a God Machine Chronicle, before giving some brief but very well thought out supplementary advice when it comes to creating characters that will get the most out of a chronicle featuring the God Machine as a main element. One of my favourite little bits in this chapter is a small side box that has a short list of questions that the book suggests the players answer when they come up with the concept of their character, filling in and fleshing out the character concept just a little bit more. And this idea of a character questionnaire is one that I've seen used very successfully in a number of other games, and it's personally I find it very, very heartening to see it here in the New World of Darkness. The chapter then talks about how to approach tracking the progress of a chronicle, and it lays out some sample tracks that appear featuring the pre-made tales that will appear later on in the book and providing numerous supplementary plot hooks and ideas. We then move on to Chapter 2, which is Tales of the God Machine. And this section features a series of ready-made tales or stories that can be used in a God Machine Chronicle. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail here. Suffice to say that the stories provide a good sampling of the various different scales of play, the different tiers that you can adopt, showcasing how the God Machine can work differently depending on the needs of your particular story. Now, each tale also contains the key features of the God Machine's plan or its infrastructure laid out using the template provided earlier on in the book. The chapter does an excellent job in showing how versatile the God Machine can be, even when it's built around the template or themes described in the book's introduction. Chapter 3 is titled Cogs in the Machine, and it provides more detailed background and stats for the various NPCs that feature in the ready-made tales of Chapter 2. Chapters like this are always a bit of a mixed bag in my opinion, since I find NPC design to be very much influenced by personal preference, but there's enough intriguing ideas to make this chapter worth a perusal. If you don't want to use the pre-made NPCs, there are also some more generic, i.e. not included in the ready-made tales, NPC servants of the God Machine listed. However, many of the NPCs featured in the tales can easily have the serial numbers filed off them and be reused in your own tales, whether it's the biomechanoid clockwork servitors of the God Machine or Black Nathaniel, an angel who collects souls for the God Machine. We then get to the final part of the book, which is the appendix, or the World of Darkness rules revisions. And this is, like I said, the second book featured inside the covers, as I mentioned earlier. And it provides a rules update for the new World of Darkness. This part of the book is also available in a free PDF that can be downloaded through Drive-Thru RPG, and I'll put a link down below, although it's nice to have an actual physical copy, and with the God Machine being the Mortal Chronicle book, it seems logical to include it here. The appendix begins with some additions to character creation, and there are some minor alterations, such as the fifth dot in an attribute, skill, or merit no longer costing 2 points at character gen, but most of it will be very familiar to anyone who's genned a new World of Darkness, or even an old World of Darkness character before. However, the first real main departure from previous is aspirations, and these are goals for your character and form simple statements of intent. For example, quit my dead-end job and go to work for myself, or get home for Christmas in order to see my kids. Aspirations should be created keeping in mind the scope of the game. For instance, the aspiration, get home for Christmas to see my kids, is no good if you know that the game's going to take place over the course of a week of game time and it's set in February. They should also be phrased as things you are actively trying to accomplish rather than simply things you wish to avoid. And aspirations are a great way of handing some narrative power back to the players as far as I'm concerned, and they provide a useful way for the attentive ST to see what influences their players. For example, if you choose take on the local mob family as an aspiration, as an ST, I can reasonably say that presumably you're interested in a story involving gangsters and the takedown of organised crime. Fulfilling an aspiration allows you to take a beat, which is part of the new experience point system, which I'll be discussing in a few moments. Virtues and vices have been changed from the biblical list of 7 deadly sins and heavenly virtues to, in my opinion, a far simpler and more descriptive adjective-based system. I think this will be a lot easier for some people to grasp and will result in characters that are more fitting and more close to the original vision of their creators, rather than coming up with a character and then thinking, oh, now I've got to shoehorn them into one of the predefined virtues or vices. They still work the same, allowing a character to recover a single point of willpower by following their vice as many times as they like during the session, or all of their willpower by following their virtue. Although, if I recall correctly, originally you could only do this once per session, and that's now been raised to twice per session. This makes it easier, but less rewarding, to follow the road of sin and vice, which is very appropriate for the dark horror setting of the World of Darkness. Morality has been in place by integrity, which is a concept that seems to somewhat harken back to the Hunter the Vigil book, in my opinion, where a character has a list of breaking points that force them to test for integrity loss, the breaking points being somewhat variable depending on the character concept. And a list of 5 questions is provided to help determine a character's breaking point, and some very useful examples of this process are given. And I also think this will, in addition to the character questionnaire, help flesh out the character in more detail, which can only be a good thing. The new experience system replaces the notion of the ST simply doling out a large chunk of XP at the end of a game system with a more gradual accumulation, a trickle of XP that you acquire during a session based on player actions. This is done through the use of a dramatic unit, as the game calls it, described as a beat. A number of actions throughout the book call for the player to take a beat. When a player has 5 beats, they are traded in for a single experience point. And the book provides a handy list of criteria, such as fulfilling an aspiration or opting to take a dramatic failure instead of a normal failure when the dice go against you, that allow you to take a beat. And I think this is very useful, certainly in the case of opting deliberately to take a dramatic failure to increase the drama of a session. Again, this is handing some narrative control over to the players, getting them more involved and more immersed in the game, which can only be a good thing. I think the gradual accumulation of XP through beats is a great idea, and it allows the player to see what they are accumulating their XP for, since beats are added at the time they are earned, rather than just providing you with a big wodge of XP at the end of a session. There follows a large list of merits, all of which are solidly written, with a few tweaks, presumably to aid game balance. I note, for instance, that one of my favourites, the barfly merit, has now been raised to 2 points instead of 1, which is fair considering how useful it can be for social characters, although I do question whether a separate parkour merit was entirely necessary in the World of Darkness. We then have some details on the integrity system and rules for characters whose souls have been attacked or lost. This is interesting because it introduces the concept of conditions, which are temporary modifiers to your character that earn the player beats whenever role played appropriately in a fashion that increases the complications of the scenario or the drama of the game. There are rules for social maneuvering, effectively a form of social combat that involves breaking through your opponent's barriers, or doors as they're called in the game, to convince them to do what you want. I'm personally not normally particularly keen on this sort of thing and prefer to have social interactions role played out rather than use a system like this in my own games. However, if you enjoy using these systems, I'm sure you'll find it's very solidly written. I do think, however, it could have done with a little more polish as far as the writing's concerned. Although, in my opinion, the social maneuverings rules are written up a lot better in the sequel chronicle book to the God Machine Chronicle, Blood and Smoke. Expanded details on the combat system follow, and most of this is what you'd expect from a World of Darkness combat section. There won't be too many surprises for old hands in here. It does the job it sets out to do without particularly setting my world on fire. However, an interesting optional rule called Beaten Down and Surrender is introduced, where any character taking more than their stamina in either bashing or lethal damage gains the Beaten Down tilt. Now, tilt is just a term for a combat-only condition. I'm not entirely sure why separate terminology is used, but there you have it. And anyone who takes this beaten down tilt has to spend a point of willpower every time they want to take a violent action from then on until the end of the fight. Or they can just give in and surrender. I've not used this rule in play myself, but I can see it having the potential to make combats far quicker, more dramatic, and more costly for those involved. Although I'm not sure how this would work for supernaturals and those who are affected by damage differently to mortals. We then move on to a discussion of ephemeral beings, ghosts, spirits, angels, etc. And I like the fact that the book is pulling together all of these creatures under one label and trying to apply a definitive, distinctive rule set to them. However, I'm not entirely sold on the rule set that they apply to them. Briefly, a spirit being can apply a condition to an area based on their powers or spheres of influence. Over time, or with the right circumstances, sacrifices, etc., they can strengthen this condition to the point where they can start influencing people, possessing them, affecting the physical world, or manifesting. And this all sounds fine, and I think that at the core, there's a very good system there. But the way it's written in the book seems a little confusing and overly complex. I like to read it through a good few times before I thought that I got a handle on it where I could sufficiently use it in a game. Rules are provided for researching entities and how to summon, exercise, and abjure these entities. And this basically comes down to a ritualized way of strengthening or weakening the spirit's hold on a place, or allowing them to interact with the mortal world more easily. And this section rounds off with a list of equipment and occult items, all of which is solidly written and is what you would expect from an equipment chapter. In conclusion, I think the actual God Machine Chronicles game is a great book. This huge monolithic mechanism lurking behind reality is a very compelling idea, and the book is bristling with potential plot and story hooks, along with some excellent and atmospheric artwork and some very unsettling and creepy, and in some cases horrific, stories showing the different ways that the God Machine can influence our lives. However, the rules updates I have somewhat more mixed feelings on. Some of it seems very sensible and would add a great deal to any game, such as the beat system and the aspirations. However, I think some of the ideas could have done with a little more work, such as the spirit being rules. Although I suspect that as additional Chronicle books are released, these rules will be polished up a little bit more and the rough edges will be filed away. And in fact, this has already been evidenced in the second Chronicle book, the Blood and Smoke Strix Chronicles book. I do, however, applaud Onyx Path Publishing's decision to make the rules update available, albeit with the God Machine Chronicle elements removed, for free as a PDF on drive-thru, since I think this is a great boon to people who may be strapped for cash, or for those who aren't sure to dip their toes into a revised World of Darkness game line. However, if you do have the cash, I would highly recommend the God Machine book. My own copy of it came from Drive-Thru RPG, and the print quality and the binding really is excellent. It's a thoroughly enjoyable book to read, very atmospheric, and provides you with everything you could want to create a God Machine Chronicle featuring this monolithic, huge, almost omnipresent mechanism lurking behind the background of our world. So if that appeals to you, or you're looking for a printed copy of the rules update for the World of Darkness game line, I would highly recommend the God Machine Chronicles. It's a thoroughly enjoyable book. Well, that's all for this review. I hope if you've enjoyed it, you'll click on like and subscribe down below. We release new videos every Wednesday. And if you have any comments, I hope you'll either hit me up in the Google Plus links or in the comments box below. And until next time, thank you very much for watching and listening. Take care.